The people who know me may not know you, and I wanted to just mention that there was a pattern to our meeting many years ago. I guess it might be 25 years ago. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's got to be somewhere. Yeah, it's over 20 years for sure. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And I'll tell you what the pattern was. The pattern was the Green Man. And
there was, yes.
You used to have gatherings on Fridays at your place called The Door.
Mondays. It was Mondays, yeah, every Monday. It used to be every week, every single week, every Monday night, 52 weeks a year. We used to get together and have open house. We very much so.
And you would invite different speakers. And this particular time, I was one of the invited speakers.
You were indeed.
Yeah, and that kicked off a conversation that, in spite of distance and time, has not stopped and has intensified of late.
Indeed. I can remember that time quite distinctly, because when we first got together, we went off to a garden centre called Willow Pool, and we had indecently large ice cream desserts. I seem to recall they took about half an hour to eat each one, and we sat there in this amazing sort of, it looks a bit like an African sort of wicker reed type hut thing, and we kind of put the world to rights. But I think at that point we discovered we were in sort of on the same path but on different continents. We're from completely different backgrounds, completely different in possibly in every way, but essentially driven by the same forces, I suppose you would say. And with a jolly good mutual understanding of where each other's coming from, which is rare. It's rare to find understanding. So that particular meeting, it kind of it set the bar very high, but it certainly started the ball rolling at the same time. I'll never forget those giant desserts. They were literally fish bowls, weren't they? They were just enormous. Just an indecent amount of everything in there. Marshmallow and
I remember looking at each other, and it was like some kind of omen.
Yeah, it was like, we're never going to finish this, but we did.
We did. We managed to suffer ourselves through it. Now, dear. In order to continue this conversation, can you just talk a little bit about your autobiography?
Yeah, gosh, I don't even know where to begin. I've got several paths that I've sort of trod over the years. One, the most obvious one, is the musical one. I've been a drummer since I was about 3 years old, and rumour has it I beat a tin drum out of shape when I was 18 months old, apparently. So apparently it's always been there. It's always been in me to do that, which has kept me going in a musical career now pretty much my entire life, and I still am in a band, and we have an album coming out hopefully in the spring. The band's called Copperworm. I then also have had the spiritual path, which really kicked off big style when I was around about 7.5 years of age, and I saw a ghost, but not in the traditional sense. I saw a very large figure, probably 9 feet tall, full colour, but you could see right through it. And then that set me into investigating into things like ghosts. And when you get books out about ghosts, you get ghosts, UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster, you get, ghosts and mysteries and spoon bending and you name it, all sorts of stuff. And it was the 1970s. So in the 1970s, of course, everything was coming out, everything was exploding, it was all new. So at that time, I had a fabulous, fantastic grounding, met a witch coven fairly early on, got into all of that, eventually finished up finding church when I was a teenager and went down that path to the point where I ended up becoming a vicar. And then after that, I've just gone everywhere. So I've sort of got a foot in every camp in that respect. I walk between the worlds in a spiritual sense, to the point where I've actually just finished a book on UFO related material for the latest publisher, which will reach books in a short time. At the same time, when I became a teenager, I picked up archaeology as another thread. So archaeology, history, Histories, Mysteries and Discoveries, as the group I used to run would have put it. So I am now about to become chairman of a local archaeology society. So still digging, as Mortimer Wheeler once called one of his books, many moons ago. Yeah, I am still digging. So that's really the main thrust. Once you've got a handle on that, once you realize I'm, musical, creative, artistic, and you realize that I'm also interested in the histories, the mysteries, and the discoveries, and then you combine that and you think, oh, there's books to be written, things to be done. You can kind of see where I'm coming from. You see my general direction, and nothing's changed. I mean, they say, whatever you are as a kid, those formative years, that's it. That's what you're going to be. That's what you're going to end up. The true you, the real you, will always be there. And I've been this massively weird, eclectic mix of, supposedly disparate and unconnected things, but somehow it's worked. It's kind of got me to where I am today, wherever that is.
Well, your father was an archaeologist, right?
He was what they used to call a volunteer digger in the days before archaeology was formalised. So in the 1950s and 60s, which is when Mortimer Wheeler wrote his book. So he got me involved in archaeology very early on. He sort of dumped me in this massive, great sand pit when I was 8 years old, which turned out to be a Roman villa that we were excavating on a local site. And he dumped me in there with a trowel, and off I went. And of course, as soon as you hit your first piece of Roman pottery, that's it. You're hooked. Anyone that's done archaeology will understand the statement, the chase is better than the catch.
Yes.
Because it always is. We are seekers. That is essentially the driving force behind archaeologists. I've never found anything really, valuable or worth a fortune, or but when it comes to wandering around junk shops and second-hand shops and charity shops and antique shops and all that, the chase is better than the catch. I absolutely thoroughly enjoy doing things like that. Still do. So
well, that brings us to King Arthur and the digging deep. Yeah, I know that's your new book.
It is. It's the Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. And basically, I did a sort of movie because when I was at art college and that, I was a member of a local amateur movie society. Back then it was Standard 8 and Super 8, so it was a Super 8mm film. And I did one called Seasons of the Mind, King Arthur, Seasons of the Mind, which was it finished up being about 25 minutes, half an hour long, which was quite long for a cine film. And I took it down to the local cine society, and they were like, oh, this is really interesting, and then it won some award, some section for youth, because I was only 14 or 15 when I started it. Back in 1977, but that I got the bug. You catch this Arthurian bug, and you just think, oh, there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more to know. So I kind of stuck at it. I kept notes. Then it moved to a early laptop. Then it BBC. Then it went to an Amstrad, and eventually, over the years, it's seen off at least 7 different computers, towers, laptops, etc. So here we are now with it finally finished, and the publisher I've got now is fabulous, Philip Mantle at Flying Disc Press, and to actually get it onto Amazon so that you guys can buy it, it's taken 45 years. So there's a lot of stuff in that there book. In fact, I think I might be able to do a copy. I hope the camera's good enough to see it, but here we go. That's what it looks like. There we are.
Excellent.
Polychronicon. That's what you're looking for. Very distinctive picture there, commissioned by the publisher. 488 pages. It looks a bit of a beast. It's not quite as long as the Bible or War and Peace or Lord of the Rings. It's not in the same league as that. But it will tell you everything you need to know about the real King Arthur. I believe it's English. It's about 23 quid. Including postage. I don't know what it is in dollars. You'll have to have a look from wherever you are in the world. And it's available now on Amazon. So go and have a look. It will blow your mind, hopefully.
Yeah, well, without creating any spoilers, what did you have anything yourself? Because I've always seen you as a fairly Merlin-esque figure myself.
Well, yes, I'm kind of playing to that at the moment.
I know. And that brings up the whole thing of how long Druids have been around and who they are and what they are, and the whole Western esoteric tradition. How did you first, or did you get King Arthur from the childhood hero thing, or did something else hit you when you were younger?
Well, when I started doing the original movie, the thing that struck me was the strength of the characters and the strength of the objects that these stories contained. So very, very quickly, when you start looking at these, you start to get Gawain, Bedivere, Lancelot, you get the whole Knights of the Round Table, Bors, the whole lot of them. And you start to look at them. But then you also get things like Merlin's magic stone, you get the Holy Grail, there's a whole load of maidens. I mean, there's maidens everywhere, popping out of lakes and, imprisoning magicians in trees and you name it, they're everywhere. So I then started to focus on different individuals. The first one, the most obvious one to go for, is Merlin. He's literally the thread on which everything else hangs when you start to look at the fiction. Very quickly it became apparent, if you're going to accept that Arthur was at some point a relatively real character, then you have to start to look at the other characters. The one that kind of fails miserably is Lancelot. Forget Lancelot. He's a medieval invention. He's something for the knights in shining armor, which, was 500, 600 years after Arthur's time. When you start looking at Arthur, though, Merlin's outstanding. It's the three main characters basically are Arthur, Gawain, and Merlin. Those three are the strong pillars, if you like, of the early tradition. All of them are Welsh in one form or another.
Right.
Merlin, you start to realize, couldn't possibly have existed for the whole amount of time that it looks like he was around. It looks like he's 300 years old, and it's just impossible. So very quickly you realize that he's one of a number of characters. But his identity makes him very druidic, extremely druidic. But you've got to place him in time and culture because he's there from, I think he's born around about 420, something like that. Dies around 520 AD. He lives about 100 years, his lifespan. Because he's there at that time, you're talking about Christianized druids. They're not pagan, they've crossed over. You've got the Chaldees, you've got the early church, the early religious foundations starting, and that's the character he is. He embodies all of that. He embodies a lot of the past wisdom. Druids have been around since the Bronze Age, so 3,000, 4,000 years. He's got all that knowledge. He's got all that wisdom. He's got that technical ability. He's got that philosophy. 1 minute he'd be creating fire from nowhere because he understands, the principles of combustion and what will explode. And the next minute he's looking up at the stars and he's going, any minute now there's going to be an eclipse. Bang! Everyone's gone black. Of course he's going to look magical because he's light years ahead. He's like a scientist. He's like Leonardo da Vinci all over again, and he really knows stuff. So he's quite a character, very, very druidical. That's the real Merlin. Like you say, not to put too many spoilers in the book. In the book, there are 6 Merlins. The first one is Merlin Taliesin. He's a poet. The second one's Merlin Ambrosius. That's Uther's older brother, who is a very, very just and intelligent ruler. Then you've got Merlin 1, which is the Merlin I'm talking about, Merlin Le Logan. He lives about 100, 110 years. Le Logan in Welsh means dear friend. So he is the pillar that supports Arthur right up to his victory at the Battle of Baden. After Baden, you've then got Merlin Willett, who's younger, but not by much. He gradually sees the decline of Arthur and he sees the whole country falling apart and things going wrong, which is basically why he goes mad and he finishes up living in Cumbria at the end. Then you got Merlin Tertuggen. He's a poet, bard, and also very similar to Merlin Willett. He's the last of their order, if you like. And then all of a sudden the Saxons are there, then the Danes start coming in, and the whole office of the Merlin, if you like, the Welsh Briton Merlin, it disappears. It vanishes because it's a different culture. The Saxons have no use of a Merlin, so it fizzles out. So you've got from about 400 AD right through to about 600 AD. That's the block of time you're looking at for these characters. So it's interesting, fascinating character.
When the Druids were fading, I always get the impression there was a conversation with the priestcraft. And I'm thinking of Michael the Scot and these figures that come up later who seem to be attempts to integrate a Celtic Christianity with the Celtic Druidic mysticism.
That's a lot longer process. You're referring to John the Scot, who's around sort of in the 1200s and the 1300s. He's that era, medieval, post second, post third crusade. So that's quite late on. That merger, I'm going to stick my neck out and say that merger was happening in the 1st century AD. It was happening 1,000 years before then, because the great classic one is the Romans attacking Anglesey. And the Romans attack Anglesey because the centre of Britain, which is where Chester is, which is up here, is renowned for being the capital of Druids worldwide. So they attack it to try and get rid of what is the depository of all things Celtic. That's the Druids. They know everything. They know all the history. They know all the culture. They try and get rid of them. If you were a Druid, for example, you could not be a Roman citizen, because politically you were a dissident that it never stopped rebelling against the Romans. But that's also true of the newly emerging Christians. If you were a Christian, you couldn't be a Roman citizen either. So up here, where you got Joseph of Arimathea in the 1st century, this is the foundation of early planted out Christianity, if you like. So they're not just attacking Anglesey to get at the Druids, they're attacking Anglesey to get rid of the Christians as well. And there's archaeological evidence to show they were both there on Anglesey, round about the same time, round about the attack of the Romans. So you can imagine these guys sitting down and going, we've got a lot in common. Shouldn't we work together? Shouldn't we try and, survive if we possibly can? Christians had Jesus, Yeshua, Isus, and Isus is also a Druidic god. They were waiting for Isus to come. So they had an awful lot of overlaps. There's a lot of Eastern influence in Druidism, and there's a lot of Middle Eastern influence in Christianity. So they had a tremendous amount in common. And then that just rolls on. The Celtic Church, the Chaldees and all that, that's all the Druidic influence coming through in early Christianity.
And so the evidence is that Christianity was in the British Isles almost from its conception.
Yes. The crucifixion occurs, give or take a year either way, round about 36 AD. And at that point, every Christian then is a target, because the Romans really don't like them. There's 3 significant emperors, ending with Nero, who burns Rome and blames the Christians. There's 3 significant emperors there that are persecuting Christians. So basically, Joseph of Arimathea, he gets imprisoned, he gets forgotten by the Romans or whatever. Miraculously, he escapes. He gathers up everybody of significance, puts them in a boat, and he goes, I know where we can go. We're going to get as far away from this bunch of jokers as we possibly can. If you go any further than the British Isles, you fall into the Atlantic. So he must have known from trading days that there were things here that were of purpose, of use to him. So he comes here, lands on Wirral Hill, he builds the first church in North Wales, and that's it, we're off. Well, that's around about 52, 54 AD. Whereas the Catholic Church doesn't form till 60, 61, 62, because they're Peter and Paul, but we're Joseph of Arimathea. And that's official. If you went and asked the Pope, he would say, the oldest church on planet Earth outside of Jerusalem and where it all happened is here. It's here in the UK.
So would that be called the Celtic Church then?
Yes, absolutely. It's the foundation of Celtic Christianity, which is early Christianity. So it's not the kind you find after Constantine the Great. It's not what we've got knocking around now. It's a different form. It's got a different cultural background. And in many ways, it's got a totally different outlook, which the book does go into. The book does mention that, because you've got to grasp that to understand the background to the Merlins. And then you've also got to grasp that to understand where Arthur's coming from, because he doesn't behave like your regular, normal, average, everyday Christian. He's very different.
Although I recall he did carry a cross into battle.
He did, but chances are that was a relic. There's a possibility he had a fragment of the true cross.
So that would be a power move.
It's a power move, and he's carrying it somewhere on his person, to declare his faithfulness. I mean, the shield as well. The shield he had was supposedly had a boar on the front, which is your standard Celtic device for a ruling warrior general. But on the reverse of it, it was said to have the Virgin Mary.
Oh, interesting.
Painted on the reverse of his shield, Yeah,
sort of a reverse reverse shield of Athena effect.
Well, yeah, one's shielding him
Yeah.
and the other
Yeah.
physically, and then the reverse is shielding him spiritually, you know. And he's got, you know, again, like me, he's got a leg in both camps. He's ticking all the boxes, you know. He's kind of confident in his version of whatever it is he's doing, and that comes out in all his equipment and the way he behaves and what he does,
and how he treats other tribes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to some extent, the fact that we still remember him. Yeah.
What would you say, you know, people have the archetypal version is something that is more of a medieval invention. The Iron Age Arthur, the historical Arthur, the one that you're basically highlighting, you're basically saying this is the Iron Age Arthur, and this is what we actually know about him.
Yeah.
He is quite a different figure than the popular version.
Very much so. He is a trained warlord. He's a trained warrior leader. He's not a king. I think the king he served under was Melvyn Gwynedd, which was King of Wales at that time.
Right.
And he was quite ruthless. You know, he had 7 sons, all of whom were dead before him. And a couple of them died at his own hand. He had 3 wives, which for various different reasons, political and otherwise, you know, the first one was put away. The second one didn't really amount to much. And the third one was Guinevere, which was a political alliance with the Picts. So, you know, he did things in very much in a warlord way. You know, he's got more similarities with Genghis Khan than he has with, you know, Richard the Lionheart.
Right.
Yeah.
So that indicates to me this sort of honoring, basically, the Genghis Khan idea is you're treated in proportion to your loyalty.
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
So basically, it's all about fealty.
Yeah, it is. It is. He expects that from the people around him as well. I mean, the first major battles he has in the battle list, which is the famous, the oldest surviving record of his campaigns. The famous battle list starts basically with him attacking all the people that oppose him to the north. So off he goes, you know, and he clears out all these people that oppose him, and that's fine. And he picks up the Scythians for reinforcements and the rest of it. But as soon as he gets back, because Chester's Camelot, as soon as he gets back to Chester, the next lot of people he attacks are his own people. He sets off into North Wales and he goes, you know, subduing his own surrounding tribesmen and his own surrounding rulers. He goes and sorts that out next because he's got so much support. And then only when he's done that, when he's cleared the north and he's cleared all the folks off towards the east, only then does he turn his attention to the west and start to go Saxon bashing, basically. You know, he only goes and faces his real big enemies when everything is in place, when he's got all his ducks in line. But he's not afraid to, you know, sort out those that oppose him and deal with them, you know, take them out if necessary.
So he's a classic warlord and thorough and establishes basically a secure base.
Yes, it's interesting because in Roman times, the 3 of the 4 major military districts of Britain, they come along and join. They terminate, if you like, at Chester, and Chester's the biggest port, the biggest fortification Rome ever built. It's 11 acres bigger than any other fort, and it's bang at the centre of the British Isles. So clearly, that's going to be his headquarters. That's Camelot. That's where he's operating from. But then he's operating under the very last, if you like, of the Roman pattern. So those military zones, they are the military zones that he campaigns in, and he does them sort of 1, 2, 3. He does them in that order. So you can see that he's following an earlier structure. It's things like that. I mean, the book is fantastic for doing that because it's chronological. It makes sense out of all of these details, these complexities, but it fills in all the background. It gives you all this fine detail. So you've then got a peg then to hang your hat on, if you like. It makes sense of what comes later.
What struck me when I was reading the book, and I was lucky enough to get an early copy, was this idea that the Round Table is actually the name of a building.
Yeah, it's a friend of mine who's been a long-standing archaeologist in Chester, and he was investigating this thing called the elliptical building, which is elliptical, but essentially, if you'd have glanced at it, you'd have thought it was round. It's a bit like the Pantheon in Rome. It's that kind of structure. And it sat right smack bang in the middle of Chester, right on the most prominent hill, this enormous thing. And it was there right from the beginning. So it was still standing in Arthur's day. And it's funny because we were doing some filming for a TV program, and he sat there with a cup of tea. I'm sat there with a cup of tea, and I'm like, so what can you tell me about this building? And he kind of looked at me with this wry smile on his face, and he went, I can't officially say this, he said, because I'm the city archaeologist, so I'm not allowed to tell anybody this. He said, but Tabliarum Rotundus, that's what the Saxons would have known it as, the round floor. And I'm like, hang on a minute. So it's not like a physical, it's not like a wooden table, it's not like a tea table. It's a circular area for the meeting of important folks.
How big was it, Mark?
It's big enough. The building itself is it's a bit smaller than the Pantheon, but it would have been big enough to hold, maybe 80 to 100 people. But the big significance is the building was broken into 12 segments. So whichever way you look at it, it's a table, and it's got 12 sections, each of which could house those 24 commanders. So if you divided up the floor according to its space and its shape and the way the building was built, you'd finish up with the Knights of the Round Table. That's what you'd end up with. You would end up with 12 large areas divided into two, giving you the 24 Knights of the Round Table. It's little things like that. You start thinking, hang on a minute, this is way, way beyond coincidence. It's right out there. The Roman baths in Chester, they were used as a palace in the Dark Ages. Guess what? That's what Arthur had. You've got this Tabliarum Rotundus, as the Saxons knew it, round table. There it is, circular building, 12 sections, 24 knights. Bingo, Bob's your uncle. It's there. It physically exists. You had the biggest military headquarters in Britain in Chester, with all the statues of the gods and everything. So you can mass an army there. It's got massive walls, massive gates. And the amphitheatre, it's thought that's where the first Christian martyrs were, martyred in the arena. So that's there as well. So by the time you start stacking all this up, you're thinking, do you know what? I really can't think of anywhere else in Britain that's on that scale. It's 11 acres bigger than any other Roman fort ever built.
Wow.
And the more you dig into it, you start thinking, hang on a minute, it was planned by Vespasian. Vespasian's previous job before he came to Chester was Jerusalem. He went to conquer Jerusalem. So he's coming back to Chester from Jerusalem. He ends up in Chester, and he's like, oh, this is where Joseph of Arimathea was. Let's make this amazing city a spiritual city. Let's put another dimension in. And this is the guy that built it. Him and his son, I think Trajan was his son. The pair of them start this amazing city off, and that's it. It becomes the White City of God. Ultimately, it becomes Camelot. The story, the archaeology, the history, the legends associated with it, there simply is nowhere else. And they've known that for centuries. They've absolutely known that for centuries. When William the Conqueror rode into Chester in 1072 AD, when he rode in, the people living in Chester would be able to point to these buildings because most of them were still standing. So, there's the palace, there's the Round Table, there's the amphitheatre. They would all still be in ruins there. But he rode in there, and lo and behold, if there's not a round table, there's actually a round table on the Bayeux Tapestry with him sat at it. So, when you begin to look at this, you think, no, this is way, way beyond coincidence. Geoffrey of Monmouth, History of the Kings of Britain, written in the early 1100s, I think it was about 1120, 1130, something like that. Where does he get all his information from? He gets it from, essentially, Bangor, North Wales, and Chester. That's where he's getting it from, because this area is just full of Arthur.
Yeah. And it's just, and this is somehow been sneakily and or conveniently overlooked for a long time due to what I would foresee as the fashion of politics.
Well, it is to some extent. It's down to the Normans. I mean, William the Conqueror. It's funny you should mention him. He's the guy that really, really did not like the Saxons. Did not get on with the Saxons at all. He favoured the Danes. He favoured the Vikings. They were fine, but he absolutely hated Britons, Saxons, all that lot. Wasn't interested. And it's the Normans, quote, Vikings, that relocate their capital to London. So from that point on, if you like, the fate of Chester as Britain's most prominent city was sealed. It was gone. As far as everybody else was concerned, it was off down south to London with it. But London, I mean, even the Anglo-Saxons, their capital was Winchester.
Right.
So London, for the first 1,000 years of the AD period, London is relatively irrelevant. Yeah, it's a great big fucking great Roman fort, but it was abandoned like everywhere else. It didn't go anywhere. Chester was never abandoned. There was never a period in history when it was not lived in.
And the wall still stands.
Yes, you can do most of the walls. You can certainly walk all the way around the circuit to this day, but there's probably certainly three sides of it. It's got an incredible state of preservation. Sadly, we've lost the elliptical building though, because they stuck the bus centre on it in the 1970s, so it's gone. There's a few pieces of archaeology in storage, and that's all.
All right. So there were signs of a foundation.
Yes. Yeah.
Was it a wooden building?
No, stone. In
Wow.
fact, there's an interesting story behind it, because Vespasian and Trajan planned it, and they wanted to build it, and then it disappears. It's nothing. It's just an open piece of ground inside the city, and it stays that way for a couple of 100 years. And then somebody seems to have stumbled on the plans. They find the plans, and they're like, "Well, shouldn't we build it? Shouldn't we get it finished?" So actually, it's a couple of 100 years after it's planned before it actually gets built. And when it's built, it goes up. It's quite spectacular. It's this amazing building. And that's why it survives as long as it does. It's not an early Roman building, although it is in planning. In structure, it's actually quite late. Fascinating building, honestly, really fascinating. It had a fountain originally at its centre, which was then removed and paved over. It was surrounded by baths. So on one side it's joined onto the military bit, but on the other side it looks like a religious temple. It's odd. It's such an odd building. There's nothing like it really anywhere else in the Roman world. And the fact that it's elliptical means it's vesica shaped. So then you start to think, okay, if it's an early Christian building, that shape is associated with the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
So what were they aiming for? What were they shooting for when they built that building?
Yeah, one of a kind. One of a kind,
yeah. And the jury's still out on that. Archaeologists are still debating over what it may have been. Who knows? We may never know. But it's all that information's in the book. It's all there.
Fantastic. I would be remiss not to talk about the Grail. But when we've talked about the Grail, Mark, by the time you finish, I want to talk about the holy place setting.
Well, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, in a nutshell, anything that was created at the Last Supper, so that's, like you say, everything, the whole dinner service, and anything that was created at the crucifixion, those two areas produce what are known over the years as Holy Grails, plural. I ended up with about 27 of them. So, when you start looking at the crucifixion, you've got crown of thorns, you've got the robe, you've got the lance, you've got the nails, you've got everything, even the cross itself. All of those things could be regarded as a grail that you could go on quest to find. And a lot of them turn up in Arthurian literature, especially in the Grail procession, because you get maidens, platters, spears, you name it, it's all there. It's called the lance, I think, in the procession. But then the Last Supper, that's an interesting one. Many people have conjectured it was either Joseph or somebody connected with him that set that whole thing up and made it possible. So they could then go back with hindsight, knowing that, the cup that Jesus passed round and, the cup the disciples had and dipped their bread in and what have you, knowing that they were significant, they could go back and salvage them. If you were to say, what do I think it was? I think there are two stone cups made of onyx that still survive. They're over in Spain. I think one is the chalice of Donna somebody or other. Anyway, whatever they are, they're in Spain. They're in the book.
I've done research on those too.
Yeah, those particular grails seem to have a claim to being the ones that have, down the centuries, they've been the ones regarded as the real deal. There were certainly two of them in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at the beginning, so that's where it started, and then they finish up being shipped across to Spain according to some Islamic shipping receipts that were recently translated, which actually tell you that these knights, these Ruminis, these Templars actually took those two cups over to Spain. So we've got a paper trail and we've got a physical trail as well, so we can track those. But there are lots of other candidates. the bowl that collected blood at the crucifixion, that crosses over. It's
the one with the two handles. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's out there. That there's a wooden bowl that's missing as well that they think might be that. There's also a glass plate that could have been used for that. Then you got lots of different perfume and unguent containers everywhere that were embalmed Jesus's body or anointed Jesus's body, etc. But strictly speaking, that's what you're dealing with. The Grail, the Sangral, because the Viking word, San means D in capital letters, Graal means a bowl that carries anything that sustains life. So, for example, they had porridge flavored with red wine. Very similar. That goes way back. That, strictly speaking, is the Grail. That's the Passover. You're dealing with what was going on in the Passover, which of course goes all the way back to Abraham in the BC period, the actual contents of what they were doing there, as well as it being reappropriated for Christian purpose. But there's a couple of other twists and turns as well in the book, which people like. I'm not going to give it all away. I don't want to give all the spoilers away. But
no, that's good. That's good. But the fact that the book can draw a continuous line historically from Joseph of Arimathea through Arthur, and all the way up into the Templars, actually, because the Templars seem to have had a link with the Arthurian theme, intent.
It's those dratted Normans again, isn't it? If you for Normans, if you read Vikings, and for Templars, if you read Vikings, and for anybody else that goes on crusade, for 10 crusades, if you read Vikings, then all of a sudden it makes sense. They weren't all these nice polished shiny knights and all the rest of it. On the first crusade, 2/3 of the knights that went out there were actually thugs. They were just Viking mercenaries that were employed to go out there. It's because you're still in the 1000s. You're still dealing here with Vikings. So that's the culture that really got hold of Arthur, and they did a Beowulf on him. They turned him into this incredible warrior hero. And the further through that culture you get, the more superhero-esque Arthur starts to become. But essentially, they're the ones handling the material. They're the ones with access to the history, with the information, the knowledge, the timeline, the culture. They're the ones that start to handle the information. I mean, the Saxons didn't want to know. This guy Arthur's just absolutely beaten them senseless. So they really don't want to know. They don't even want to acknowledge that he exists. So people like Bede, who's an Anglo-Saxon historian, just doesn't talk about him at all. But some of their historians have to admit that the battles took place. So very often they list the battles listed in the Arthurian battle list, but don't tell you who's fighting. But then somebody many years ago made a valid point. There's some guy that's a general on your opposing army, and he's absolutely kicking your ass, but you haven't got a clue who he is. You're not going to write him into your history.
No, the ultimate insult is, forget him.
And he's nobody. Nobody knows who the heck he is at that point in time. So it's going to take a while before it starts to filter through and someone goes, oh, hang on a minute, we know who he is. He's this bloke called Arthur. So the Danes and the Vikings are the ones that really pick up that torch, if you like, and run with it. But if you leave that piece of information out, which most people do, it doesn't make any sense. Because one minute you got this Welsh warrior hero that's kicking around, in the early 500s, and then the next minute you got this shiny knight in armor, superhero figure that's running around in the 1100s. And so, hang on a minute, that's 500 or 600 years have just gone by. How did he get from there to there?
Exactly.
And that's something the book puts right. There's this kind of post-Arthur period where that development's taking place. That's covered in the book. And again, by the time you get to the bit where it's talking about literature, which is the last section of the book, when you get to that part, hopefully that'll make sense. Right. Yes, I know where that comes from now.
Right. What about the women? You hear about Druid, you hear about Merlin. I remember talking to John Matthews, and even, 7 or 8 years ago, he started looking at the theme of well maidens in relation to Arthur. And when he's brought up this new discovery of the term well maidens in some old manuscript, Mark, what I thought of was, this sounds like the same network of prophetesses the Greeks had with the Pythonesses.
there is an enormous crossover, because you've got to remember in Druidry, the Druids, I mean, Druid is a Sanskrit word, so obviously Druidism is influenced from the East as well as from what we know in Europe and the West. So it's a merger of everything that was known, at that time. I mean, basically the Romans are everywhere. Roman Empire is massive. So you imagine the information exchange that's taking place. They've even found, those mummies near the Great Wall of China that appear to be Celts, and they're buried next to the Great Wall of China. So the cross-cultural part of it that archaeology tends to ignore is massive. It's absolutely enormous. So the idea of having prophetesses and druidesses, and the idea that there are these important female characters that take really major roles in the Arthurian cycle, it's not as alien as you might think. The Celts were tremendously even-handed. Look at Boudica, Boadicea. You've got a Celtic warrior there leading her tribe. That's not uncommon. Probably 40% of the chariot burials they've found over on the west coast, up in Yorkshire, Northumbria. 60% of them, 40 to 60% of them are women. They're female. So there's this even-handed bog bodies, again, half male, half female. As you start to look at what's going on, there is this total even-handedness. And that runs all the way into the Vikings as well. If the Viking gets on the ship and he goes sailing because he wants to go, pillaging somewhere, he'll hand over a bunch of keys to his wife. Those keys are everything. The sheds, the doors, the chests, all the locks on his estate. Those keys are everything. She literally becomes him.
Right.
Now,
so this is the Celtic thing of the woman could own property, therefore she had the same power in essence.
So again, you've got that running right through the Arthurian tradition. So you've got maidens in some really powerful positions. Arthur would not have had the support of the Scythians and the Picts had he not, formed an alliance, if you like, through Guinevere. Guinevere is a Pictish queen, and the Picts of southern Scotland rule through the female line. They rule through their queens. So at that point in time, it just would not have happened. He would not have got the support. And there were Picts living in his territory. They lived in North Wales, they lived in the Mersey Valley, they lived in Derbyshire, they lived in Cheshire, they lived in Staffordshire. They'd migrated down here. So he really, really needed that third marriage, if you like, in order to cement his claim. So they're really important. I mean, again, I make a point in the book. You've got this amazing study of the Grail procession. So there he is in Percival. He's sat there and he's watching the Grail procession comes marching in. And you've got this big long list of, there's a tray in some legends, there's a spear in others, and then the Grail gets paraded in this, that, and the other. The entire shooting match is carried and paraded by maidens, and most people completely forget that. They just totally overlook it. Hang on a minute. This is one of the most important religious processions in the history of the Arthurian cycle. You're talking about the number one most religious artifacts of all time are appearing in this procession. And they're not carried by priests. They're not carried by religious men. They're all carried by Grail maidens. It's the maidens. Now, a lot of people think that the Templars have got a lot to do with what happens with Percival, with Parsifal, the von Eschenbach's German classic. They think the Templars coded a lot of their beliefs and their way of doing things into it. Some people even think the procession is a code for their initiation ceremony. Well, if that's the case, then the Templars are completely even-handed as well. And that's also true. It's certainly in southern France after the Crusades, the number of female knights outnumber male knights 2 to 1 in the preceptories. So they're taking women the same way the Vikings did, as equals. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, Joan of Arc doesn't look quite so extraordinary. She's just the last of a large number of women that were knights that were involved. But I can trace that all the way back to the Anglo-Saxons. There was a manual. Saxon defense manual written in probably around about 980 AD. And that's actually got warrior positions, 2 illustrations of women fighting with spears and shields and swords and, doing what the men do. So, and back to Druids again. Yes, Druidesses, there were loads, absolutely loads of them. The whole culture was even-handed. So yeah, they're guardians of wells. They're guardians in the same way that you'd find in Greek culture. They're prophetesses. They speak wisdom, and they infiltrate and infect everything in the Arthurian tradition. You can't escape them. They're all over the place.
And to me, they seem to be the turning points in the stories.
Yes, they usually are. They begin and end things, and also they become very often the focus of the tale. Certainly in the medieval tales, Guinevere is very often, slighted or insulted, or something happens in front of her, and you can almost imagine her turning to the rest of the knights going, right, who's going to champion me? And 9 times out of 10 it's Gawain that steps forward. It's never Arthur, because he's far too important and busy doing something else. And Gawain becomes, as it were, the knight of the lady, the knight of the maiden. He becomes the defender of ladies. And his story's amazing. His story's in the book as well. It's the story of the loathly lady, Dame Ragnall, because he ends up marrying a Saxon. It's got a really sad ending, I hate to say, but it's a good story. So folks should check that one out.
Are you going to I know you want to take a pause after releasing this book. Do you see your interest leading you to anything else related to the Arthurian stream in the future?
I can confidently say yes, because if it took 45 years to get here with Arthur, then there's another book that's been ticking away for 44 years that I started in 1978. And it's the biblical material. It's the stuff that forms the backbone, forms the background to everything that you see happening with Arthur. And I tried to lay the ground rules for this down, if you like, in this book, because chronologically people have to realize, well, for example, in medieval times, nobody had a Bible.
Right.
If you wanted to know anything about the Bible, you'd have to go and consult someone who was in religious office. Right. Hence, everything the Knights Templar did was a complete mystery. People are looking at it going, I don't know what the hell they're doing. I haven't got a clue. They didn't have the background that we've got today. So I'd like to be able to try and engineer some of that back and have a look at material that people don't know exists, lost material, the extra material like the Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all the other stuff that's come out in recent years that just wasn't there. Let's say when they translated Bibles in the 1930s, 1940s, some of the translations we've got are missing a lot of that background information. So I'd like to go back to source again and see what new information comes tumbling out. And I've already got an inkling it's going to be possibly slightly more radical and edgy even than the Arthur book. But that will also impact on people's view of the development of the early church, development of Celtic Christianity, etc. So there's definitely something else coming.
It sounds like you're targeting something like the restitution of the original Celtic Bible.
Oh, I'd like to go even further. I'd like to go all the way back, so that you sat there, in the upper room in whatever it was, 36 AD, and you can turn to Jesus and go, so I'd love to know about, and you ask him, because there's a lot of stuff out there that answers the questions that hasn't been put forward. Good. And I've got enough background in that area to be able to, pull a few rabbits out the hat for folks. So that's coming. That is coming at some point.
Good. Let's follow a few breadcrumbs out to your other published books. First off, we met on the topic of the Green Man, and you did do a text on the Green Man.
Yes, I did. If you want to know the order the books come up in, this will appeal to the Arthurian fans as well, because this feeds into it. I did 3 books on this area, the Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries series. I did book 1, 2, and 3, and there's quite a bit of Arthurian background bits in those books, although they're regional. They're very much regional. They were done in the 1990s. They were published by Churnet Valley Books in Leek, and they still have stocks available. So even if it says on Amazon, no longer available, especially the 3rd book, the green one with the green man on the front cover, coincidentally, that one is quite hard to get hold of. But if you contact the original publisher, they still have them, so you can still go and get them. That's the first 3. Then you move on You've then got the disappearing Ninth Legion, which is this legion that marched out of York, never to be seen again. That was a great little mystery to do, and I co-authored that with another chap because he was better at Romans than me. I'm Celts and he was Roman, so we did that together. That was followed by the life and times of the real Robin Hood, which again is perhaps the prototype for the Arthur book, because that is another chronology. It's written as a polychronicon. It's written chronologically, but the problem with that one is it's spelled ROBYNHOODE. So that's proven to be a bit of a headache online, because if you don't spell it right, you don't get that. So just type me in and you'll find it. That's out there. Then that was followed by The Green Man. Basically, that publisher, which was John Hunt Publishing, he basically said, well, you know, you've done Robin Hood and you've mentioned the Green Man in your books in the past. Do you want to tackle that? So I'm like, yeah, all right. I've been doing a talk about 10 years on the Green Man. It's time I typed it up. So I basically produced that book, and that's been a bestseller. You know, it's always in the top 5 on Amazon, you know, to do with the Green Man. It's a great little book, fabulous little book. That's then followed by Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, which by sheer coincidence I can actually pop up with it. There it is. Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. That is a tiny book compared to the one I've just done. This one's 90 odd pages, but I wrote this under lockdown. I did it because I thought, you know, I need to be looking at human species and where we're going, because if this pandemic, as it was back then, you know, if this turns out to be earth-shattering, world-changing, etc., you know, if we're all going to drop dead, it'd be nice to have a book about it so people understand what's going on. That one deals with some amazing issues. It's proper science. It's a nice follow-up though to The Green Man, because the contents of The Green Man link very nicely to that. Different publisher now. We're on Philip Mantle at Flying Disc Press. Next one then is the King Arthur book. And then the one that's going to follow King Arthur is back in 2008, I released a DVD called Europe's Roswell, and it was about a UFO crash that took place in 1983. That we're in the process of converting into a book. So hopefully that's going to come out in the second half of the year, mainly because I can't do all these books at once. So once that one's out of the way, that's when the biblical book hopefully will start to come through.
Okay, and the biblical thing sounds like it's already at least at the halfway point.
Yeah, I kind of keep my cards quite close when it comes to things like that, because obviously publishers will, if they know you've got a book, you know, they'll phone you up and say, can we have it now, please? And I'm like, nope, I'm not ready yet. So it might just be, you know, crossing the dots and crossing the T's and dotting the lowercase J's. You know, I might be at that stage, but I'm not with this one. I'm probably only about 50% through. But you've got to remember that in order to get this book done, I've had to read the entire of the Nag Hammadi library, the entire of the Dead Sea Scrolls, all the books associated with that. I mean, I've been on this for years. You know, it's a 44-year project up to this point. I've read an enormous amount, all the biblical stuff, all the apocryphal stuff, everything I can get my hands on. So by the time I put this together, it's going to be the best of the best with honours. That's what I'm aiming for. Yeah, definitely. Original language stuff, all kinds of stuff I've had to go back to.
All right.
So that's basically it.
Well, that's not much. I think we could digest that pretty quick now and come up for a nutritional break.
Well, there's about 3 or 4 DVDs out there and tons of stuff on the internet and loads of bits and bobs. So people want to go and find anything, just my name's quite unique. I think you might have it on the screen there. It's quite unique. Just go and find me.
If people came to the UK, would you be interested in doing a tour?
The short answer is yes. I did actually do a couple of tours many moons ago. We had a crack at doing a 2-day tour in Wales. There's always accommodation available. That's not a problem. We can always find places to put people. And over 2 days, we covered a lot of ground. It's worth saying that it's not one of those Arthur books where it talks about a load of stuff that you can't see, and it talks about places that are long gone and you can't visit. It's not that kind of book. It will tell you where things are, and it will tell you where there are places that you can go and visit. In some cases, there are physical objects we can go and see. So I'd be quite willing to do that, but it does take about 2 days to do it.
Yeah. Okay. I just thought I'd throw that out because some people might well be interested.
Yeah, if someone wants to put a tour together, you've got yourself an instant tour guide here.
Yeah.
And all the information's available. I'd be delighted.
Oh, and also, didn't you do something years back for the BBC?
It was ITV.
Oh, okay.
ITV One Granada was Lost
Yeah.
Treasures television series. Very, very difficult to get hold of the material now. There are 500 DVDs that were done at the time of series 1, so they're like really collectible now. And there's a couple of snippets on the internet, but we're still negotiating to try and get all 22 episodes out there. It was rebroadcast on Sky. So that ended up with us doing 3 Sky specials, and the one on Chester is available, or was available, on DVD. Again, very difficult to get hold of nowadays, but that'll be out there somewhere. And then fairly recently, we've gone through lots of different projects over the years. I've done loads and loads of other things. Fairly recently, I finished a documentary on Robin Hood, which is still available. You can still get The Life and Times, The Real Robin Hood. The follow-up to that has just been finished filming. That's Disappearing Ninth Legion. That now exists. So that's coming soon. And then, of course, I'm on the latest series of Ancient Aliens. I'm on 4 of their programs. So I'm back doing that again. It's another one of those threads that never goes away. I'm always doing something out there.
Well, no rest for the wicked on that one. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, do you have email contact you could give before we sign off?
The last advert is always pretty much the same. If you want to buy it, go to Amazon. That's it. Don't go anywhere else. Just go to Amazon, type my name in, off you go. You should start to get all the books and everything coming there. If you want to get me, there's only one place you can go, and that's Facebook. So if you friend me, as long as you're not Fifi Trixabel with a picture of a unicorn and only 2 photos on your site, in which case I won't accept you. If you're a real person and you really want to friend me, come and find me, because I'm out there. I'm easy enough to find. I'm open to the public, so you can come and get me. And then we can chat on Messenger. And then if you want to take it further, I've got an email as well, which I'll gladly divulge to folks via Facebook. But those are the 2 things. I mean, a really simple guide to get hold of, really. It's just Amazon and Facebook. That's it. They're your 2 target destinations.